We've got David Miller's joined us now. Hi, David.
Hello.
Just to introduce you a bit, your claim to fame is being sacked by Bristol University.
I've only got one claim to fame.
You've got a few. I think you've got more than just one. All right, fair enough. But certainly, as far as we're concerned, can you just tell us how that's all gone? Because I noticed from time to time we hear a little bit more about. Because I mean, you're a writer, a lecturer, professor, and suddenly the Israel lobby turns on you, and Bristol University seems to cooperate with them. So how did it all turn out?
Well, how it turned out was that I took them to court and we won. The court decided I'd been wrongfully dismissed, and the court decided that the reason I'd been wrongfully dismissed was because I had anti-Zionist views, which was not what the university had said. The university said it's because I'd upset students. And therefore the court decided that not only was I dismissed because of my anti-Zionist views, but that anti-Zionist views were worthy of protection in a democratic society, which is the terminology from the Equality Act, which means that henceforth anti-Zionist views are protected under law and are nothing like being the opposite of worthy of respect, which is akin to fascism. So
it's interesting, isn't it? We've had quite a lot of journalists who have been arrested. Craig Murray, we've had Richard Medhurst, Sarah Wilkinson, for anti-Zionist views. Actually, I don't think all of them have been arrested, but the thing that bothers me is the way that the police collect these journalists' contact books and their information, which could then find its way into the hands that those individuals could be then targeted over in Israel, if that's where they are. So how does that translate into the police arresting people supposedly for their anti-Zionist views? That what the police say is that it's terrorism.
Well, I mean, there's two things, isn't there? I mean, the police have got two cudgels to use against us, one of which is the Terrorism Act, which they're increasingly using against journalists, including, of course, most famously recently, Asa Winstanley, the only journalist so far to have been, full-time journalist to have been raided at his home address as opposed to when he's coming in or out of the country. And the second cudgel they've got is anti-Semitism. Now, of course, what they define as anti-Semitism is what the court, in my case, decided was anti-Zionism. So there's a contradiction there, isn't there? The police in 2016, along with every government department, adopted the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition of anti-Semitism, which is the Israeli government's...
So did that put the police at odds with the Home Office, for example, and the rest of the government, or what?
No, the Home Office adopted it as well. Right. Every single government department.
God, really?
And not only that, before the new government was elected, I think Gove and also Cruella was saying that not only should we have the IHRA, but we should have a charter which every public body should sign up to, saying that, if you said something bad about Israel, you should be killed or something. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but that's the kind of tendency which we're facing. So the other cudgel is of course anti-Semitism, and so that's why we've got a 4,000% increase in anti-Semitism in the last year, because people are being arrested for saying "Free Palestine" and "From the river to the sea." And the best one is the two women in October last year who had effigies of bloodied babies who were arrested for a hate crime against the Jews. Somehow this was a trope. And of course it's because the definition they're using is a definition which mainly mentions Israel. So these are anti-Zionist crimes which people are being counted as anti-Semitic crimes. And that is the difficulty.
So is there any solution in any sort of electoral politics? So, for example, with the general election, with a new government coming in, with Starmer, within the Conservative Party, an election of a new leader?
Well, obviously, you're having a laugh with that question. But, I mean, no, of course there's no alternative. There is no alternative in party politics in this country, in the US, in Germany, but because the main parties are all Zionists.
So the parties are deciding these things, it's just that they happen to be pro-Zionist?
They're all Zionists. I mean, in this country, the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, the Lib Dems and the Greens are all Zionist parties. The Workers' Party is not a Zionist party, I'm glad to say.
Oh, my goodness. What a coincidence we have someone there.
It's one of the very few that there are. And as a result, in this country, and in America and in Germany, if anyone wants to do anything in solidarity with the Palestinians, we have to destroy the current political system and have new parties, because the old parties are not repairable.
Andy, do you just want to say something about why it is that you think that your party's in such a tiny minority here amongst British political system?
Yeah, well, I think Labour has forgotten socialism, and I was scribbling notes, and I'm glad I've read them again, because I attended this year the TUC. So we're talking Labour movement now. Have a guess. How many times was socialism or socialist mentioned in the whole? So we're talking TUC now. So the General Council report every single motion from all the affiliated trade unions in the TUC, how many times was socialism mentioned?
5?
0.
Okay.
And whilst I am a gambling man, and I'll probably gamble that same result is the same with the Labour Party conference as well, and all the reports from there. So my point being is that no one talks about socialism anymore, and that's gone. It's neoliberalism. It's capitalism, red tooth and claw. So I think what we've got to do, if you're of the left, and I mean the socialist left, not the liberal left, not the woke left, but if you're a socialist, then we got to start building a socialist party as an alternative to the Labour Party.
Is that Corbynista? Is he socialist?
I'm afraid not. No.
No?
Well, there will be socialists there, but I think they're wasting their time right now. Jeremy Corbyn had the opportunity, I think, several years ago to turn all of those hundreds of thousands of people that were singing his name in Glastonbury for the love of God. He could have turned that popular support into a real, a socialist alternative to Labour, and he didn't.
Why not? Why not?
Oh, you'll need to ask him. I don't know.
Well, we'd ask David. What do you think? We should be mourning the death of socialism, David? Something has happened, hasn't it, to the Labour Party particularly?
Look, I mean, the mainstream parties have been dead for a long time. There was a brief moment after 2015 when Jeremy comes in, and we all think, is there a chance? And of course there wasn't. And Jeremy has betrayed his own legacy. And part of the reason for that, I think, is that he listened to his advisors. I mean, he had advisors around him, people who had given very, very bad advice and resulted in him losing the leadership of the party. And what did he do with them? Did he sack them? No, he still got them advising him, and they're giving him the same advice. And that's why he's not going to play a meaningful role in a new left, which the Workers' Party, I think, is going to be at the head of.
Well, the fact of the matter is, though, Britain is just the unsinkable aircraft carrier. We are little minnows that get ordered around by the Empire, and the Empire has just got a new boss this week. Well, it's not really a new boss, it's a recycled old boss. There was a similar problem that we've had with the British Labour Party with the Democrats, David. I think most of us can look at Kamala Harris and think, well, that wasn't actually your best player. But why do you think Kamala Harris was up against Trump rather than somebody else?
Well, because it was too late for them to change it. I mean, people said if she'd gone in sooner that she could have persuaded people she was a nicer person and got more votes.
Well, someone must have said within the party. Hang on, someone within the Democratic Party must have said, "Look, there's no way that Biden can run. The guy's off his head." And why was there no serious attempt to get a Democrat? Like somebody like Bernie Sanders, who whatever failings, at least he's got a lot of popular support in the States still, in the Democratic Party. You even had people heckling Kamala Harris over Gaza, for example, from her own party. Now, this isn't Trumpites infiltrating a Democrat rally. This is her own people heckling her. She obviously wasn't the best one.
Well, but the Democrats, the people in charge of the Democrats, are deranged. I mean, they're just deranged, and they wouldn't backtrack on the genocide, and they also have this view, don't they? They have this mad view. They're all liberals. They have this mad view that the Russians are trying to intervene in the election, and the Russians are working with Trump, and all this kind of utter nonsense, some of it sourced from British intelligence, actually, back in the day. And so they've got no way of actually dealing with the actual politics of the situation. And so that's a problem for them. But look, the Democrats are never going to be anything which is going to move towards a progressive politics. And really the function of the Democrats in this period has been not to take on Trump and to try and win against Trump. The function of the Democrats has been to expunge and expel the possibility of people supporting the Palestinians, and that means, of course, expunging and expelling Muslims, Palestinian Americans, and Arab Americans, because that's the agenda, right? Both in this country and in America, is to remove those people altogether from parliamentary politics.
My
And
God,
that's what the strategy was of the Blairites who went over there to help Kamala to get rid of the Muslims.
I say my God because this is horrific. If you've got a powerful movement in the United States which is supporting Israel, to make sure that any support that there is, which there is a fantastic amount in the United States for the Palestinians and for peace and for humanity, is cancelled out.
That's right, and that's why, of course, the movement has to say, look, that game's finished. The game is over. We have to have new parties. And, in the UK, we've got the Workers' Party. In the US, it's not really, there's the American Communist Party. I saw won the odd seat in some of the local elections. But the movement needs to understand that there will be no end to the genocide while we engage with the mainstream parties. We have to take matters into our own hands. And that's, of course, what people did in the streets of Amsterdam last night. And that's going to happen more and more.
Well, hang on, because in Amsterdam, there was an attack apparently on Israeli football supporters, an anti-Semitic attack it was called.
A pogrom, they've called it. No,
what happened?
Well, there was an attack on the people of Amsterdam, on Muslims in Amsterdam, Moroccan people. The Palestinian flags were removed from buildings, and there was a very calm and measured response to that from some very brave Dutch Muslims who chucked some of the Zionists in the drink. And made them say free Palestine before they let them go. I mean, they were actually very gentle with them. So this was not an attack by Dutch Muslims or by people in Amsterdam. It was an attack by the fascist. And in fact, we now know that, I was going to say the fascist football fans from Israel, but now we now know that the Mossad was involved. The Mossad's goal was, of course, to stir up trouble.
What is Israel doing in a European football competition?
Well, they shouldn't be in a football competition. I mean, my question is much more than that. It's not just a question of what's Israel doing in the football competition. What is Israel doing in the domestic politics of the UK, of Holland, of the US, of Germany, of France, of Spain? Why are they there? Why are they involved in pushing Islamophobia, trying to get Muslims out of public life, trying to cause trouble so that the Palestinians or the Muslims are blamed and can be pushed out of public life? It's the same strategy they're using in the US as they've been using overnight in Amsterdam.
Well, in a way, a bigger question is why has the mass media coverage of that today been all about the Israelis having to send aircraft over to rescue these Israeli citizens who've been attacked by anti-Semites?
Poor genocide heirs who've been attacked for being genocide heirs. Yeah, it's ridiculous, of course. I mean, if that's the definition of a pogrom, well, we might need to have a little think about what pogroms were.
Well, we've got 5 or 6
past.
different channels over here. They're all saying the same thing. How come? How do they manage that?
Well, their propaganda is, first of all, I mean, you're asking me too many questions with too many ramifications. Look,
that's my job.
So the mass media is, when it comes to the question of Zionism versus the Palestinians, it's on the side of the Zionists, and part of the reason for that is that the counter-terrorism apparatus, which dominates most news about these things in this country, is signed up to Zionism. But part of it also is, of course, the effectiveness of Zionist propaganda, and part of it also is the fact that the Zionists have penetrated much of the mass media.
Right.
It's 3 things.
Okay, Andy, what do you make of the? Is there some sort of, so before we say goodbye, some sort of solution to this over in? Particularly the massacre in Gaza, although of course this is spreading to many other fronts. I mean, one thing I would agree with Donald Trump is he seems to be absolutely aware that this could turn into a third world war. It could bring in, there's already the fighting going on directly into Lebanon. And the threatened exchange of ballistic missiles with Iran. Is there any way to stop this kind of thing?
That's a huge question for little old me. Hundreds of politicians over the years have tried to answer that, but for me, I think United States using Israel for their geopolitical influence in the region, right? For whatever reason, there's hundreds, but whatever reason you want to pick, let's say that. So I think, Israel can't fight a war without any weapons, so stop giving them weapons. And that includes the UK as well. Stop giving licenses out. Not just stop the 8 we stopped. Stop the whole 30 that's going, anyway, 8%. Anyway, they can't fight a war. And get to the end bit. The negotiation always brings about peace, and let's count the middleman, the slaughter that's going on there. Everybody in the world, I think, apart from the leaders of certain countries understand that this is a really bad thing. They also understand that what happened on October the 7th was a really bad thing. You don't solve that bad thing by killing more people, because what you're doing is creating more, depending on which side you're on, freedom fighters, terrorists, you're going to create more of those people, unless you get rid of every single Palestinian, which is probably what they're trying to do in my mind. But the fighting's got to stop, and then, well, 2-state, 1-state solution,
Well, they seem to like to get people fighting over whether it's a 1-state or a 2-state. It seems to me that it doesn't really matter that if you're going to have Zionists in charge, 1 state is never going to work. It's going to have to be 2 states, 2 separate regions, unless the Zionists are crushed, politically crushed. But anyway, thanks ever so much for coming in.
No
the Workers' Party is your party. Any bits of news, anything coming up in the next few weeks, or...
No, just come and join us. You know what we got to do. We've got to be the socialist alternative, so come and join us.
Okay, Andy Hudd, thanks very much for joining us. What about, do you see any solution? I remember asking the same question to a BBC journalist who knew Golda Meir and people like this for years on the Middle East problem, and he said, no, there is no solution. Do you see any solutions to the question I just asked Andy?
It's quite straightforward. We all know what the solution is. Don't we? I mean, the solution is the end of Israel. You remove Israel, then you've removed all of the need for there to be conflict.
They've got nukes, haven't they? They're not so easy to winkle out necessarily, are they?
They stole the nukes from America, of course. Americans did nothing about it. But yes, well, they will be collapsed. They can be collapsed, and we're at a point where decisions can be taken in the Islamic Republic of Iran which can lead to them in short order collapsing, and that's what has to happen in order for there to be peace in the Middle East. There's no other way.
So this is a military solution?
That's right, yeah.
What about financial? What about just stopping the cash? What about stopping the weapons, as Andy said?
Well, I mean, the problem is that...
Isn't that going to force a political reality on the ground over there?
Well, it would, but the Americans aren't going to do that, and they're supplying 69% of the weapons. And the Germans aren't going to do that. They're supplying 30% of the weapons. We're supplying the intelligence and various bits of training and other things, offering the Cyprus bases to them. But those 3 countries who are, the top of the evil of the world are not going to change their mind. So they have to be forced. And the only way that they're going to be forced is by a military defeat. And of course, we're seeing in the north, Hezbollah are routing the IDF. We're seeing continued attacks from Gaza, and indeed in the West Bank. And we're sitting waiting for what is going to be the response of the Islamic Republic of Iran. They've said that they will respond. They've said that they will respond much more than they did previously, which was 200 missiles, almost all of which precisely hit their targets. Although no one was killed. I think one Palestinian was accidentally killed. And so we're sitting waiting for that. And of course, we've just had Trump elected, and the question is, what will the calculation be of the Islamic Republic of Iran in the weeks ahead?
Yeah, well, they must have probably known that Trump was likely to win.
Of course.
Martin, you also think similar thoughts about the only way to defeat Israel is militarily, or not?
I think so. We've reached the point now where you can't talk with people who are not willing to talk. I mean, there's been the Islamic Republic have tried to negotiate, as has Hamas and Hezbollah. As Nasrallah, according to the Lebanese foreign minister, had agreed to a 21-day ceasefire, so that's where they knew where he was going to be when they dropped the bomb on him and killed all these hundreds of people, and they killed him at the same time. Now, ultimately, war is horrible, but it's the way the world works. And the Israelis, as we had the chap on last week, the Christian Zionist from Colorado, and I was saying to him, well, you haven't got any hypersonic missiles. The West
they just tested their first
one. Well, yes, I know, but it's too late, because the thing is, we're actually in the war right now this minute, and it'll take at least 10 years to develop those hypersonic missiles. I'm afraid that because of the procurement process of the military-industrial complex in the West puts money in the pockets of the shareholders of the companies, but it's a rubbish way to organise things.
So you also agreed that Britain, Germany, the United States are not going to turn the screws on Israel to stop killing civilians?
They're not. Clearly not. And if obviously the other side, of the axis of resistance have been trying to find a way to negotiate with them. And of course they have to do that, even if they don't believe the other side is going to negotiate. You've got to go through the process if you're going to carry people. The same as the way the Russians have bent over backwards to negotiate with the West. People don't realise that Putin, in fact, in Russian terms, is a moderate. The pressure he's coming under in Russia is to take a harder line. But of course, if you do that, you then box yourself into a corner with the uncommitted in the developing world. They've got to see that there isn't really any other option. And I think the South Africans would, they ultimately, they led the charge in terms of accusing Israel of genocide. Ultimately, you don't stop these things by talk. I mean, we've got war memorials all over this country. We didn't talk Hitler out of power, did we?
No. Okay, so talking is what Donald Trump did at his victory speech, and he did mention some of the various wars, and he said he's going to do what he can to stop. His phrase is "stop the chaos in the Middle East." I'm not sure if that means obliterating Iran, that would stop the chaos. That's what he seems to be implying. Let's have a listen to Donald Trump's victory speech the other night now.
This will forever be remembered as the day the American people regained control of their country. So I just want to say that on behalf of this great group of people, these are hard-working people, these are fantastic people, and we can add a few names like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He came in. And he's going to help make America healthy again. And now he's a great guy, and he really means it. He wants to do some things, and we're going to let him go to it. I just said, but, Bobby, leave the oil to me. We have more liquid gold, oil and gas. We have more liquid gold than any country in the world, more than Saudi Arabia. We have more than Russia. Bobby, stay away from the liquid gold. Other than that, go have a good time, Bobby. We're going to be paying down debt. We're going to be reducing taxes. We can do things that nobody else can do. Nobody else is going to be able to do it. China doesn't have what we have. Nobody has what we have. But we have the greatest people also. Maybe that's the most important thing. This campaign has been so historic in so many ways. We've built the biggest, the broadest, the most unified coalition. They've never seen anything like it in all of American history. They've never seen it. Young and old, men and women, rural and urban. And we had them all helping us tonight, when you think. I mean, I was looking at it. I was watching it. They had some great analysis of the people that voted for us. Nobody's ever seen anything like that. They came from all corners, union, non-union, African American, Hispanic American, Asian American, Arab American, Muslim American. We had everybody, and it was beautiful. It was a historic realignment, uniting citizens of all backgrounds around a common core of common sense. You know, we're the party of common sense. We want to have borders. We want to have security. We want to have things be good, safe. We want great education. We want a strong and powerful military, and ideally we don't have to use it. You know, we had no wars. 4 years we had no wars, except we defeated ISIS. We defeated ISIS in record time. But we had no wars. They said, he will start a war. I'm not going to start a war. I'm going to stop wars. But this is also a massive victory for democracy and for freedom. Together we're going to unlock America's glorious destiny. We're going to achieve the most incredible future for our people. Yesterday, as I stood at my last stop on the campaign trail, I'll never be doing a rally again. Can you believe it? I think we've done 900 rallies approximately from them. Can you imagine? 901 something, a lot of rallies. And it was sad. Everybody was sad. Many people, I said, this is our last rally. But now we're going on to something that's far more important, because the rallies were used for us to be put in this position where we can really help our country. That's what we're going to do. We're going to make our country better than it ever has been. And I said that many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason. And that reason was to save our country and to restore America to greatness. And now we are going to fulfill that mission together. We're going to fulfill that mission. The task before us will not be easy, but I will bring every ounce of energy, spirit, and fight that I have in my soul to the job that you've entrusted to me. This is a great job. There's no job like this. This is the most important job in the world. Just as I did in my first term, we had a great first term, a great first term. I will govern by a simple motto: promises made, promises kept. We're going to keep our promises. Nothing will stop me from keeping my word to you, the people. We will make America safe, strong, prosperous, powerful, and free again. And I'm asking every citizen all across our land to join me in this noble and righteous endeavor. That's what it is. It's time to put the divisions of the past 4 years behind us. It's time to unite. And we're going to try. We have to try. And it's going to happen. Success will bring us together. I've seen that. I saw that in the first term when we became more and more successful. People started coming together. Success is going to bring us together, and we are going to start by all putting America first. We have to put our country first for at least a period of time. We have to fix it, because together we can truly make America great again for all Americans. So I want to just tell you what a great honor this is. I want to thank you. I will not let you down. America's future will be bigger, better, bolder, richer, safer, and stronger than it has ever been before. God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So that's Donald Trump's victory speech this week. David, thank you for not giving up and walking out as you're listening to that. It is tempting. It's quite long. It's about 6 minutes or so. But he's touching on all sorts of interesting points there. He must have been pretty tired, 4 o'clock in the morning or so. But he's on a mission from God. God has spared his life to let him do this.
Yeah, I mean, people believe, don't they? Some people believe who voted for him that he is against war. He will stop wars. And he put out this prospectus, didn't he? It's only a 12-point prospectus about how he's going to eliminate corruption, and they're going to stop corporate power influencing government incorrectly. They're going to stop the pharma industry, etc. I mean, some of the things he was saying sounds moderately like a kind of left-wing social democrat. But of course, what he's actually talking about is that he's going to do the bidding of the Zionists in Gaza. When he talks about stopping the war, he's talking about killing every last Palestinian. That's what the idea is. No, he wants Bibi to sort it out by January. And
is he going to kill all of the Iranians too? Is that
that's what he'll want to do? Yes, I mean that is we're standing on the edge of World War III. I mean, people already say when they look back in history, they'll say that we've already started World War III.
See, there was a sort of sensible era when there was a thing called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal, where deals had been done by the Obama government to say, well, look, you don't build any nuclear bombs and we'll relax the sanctions and let's all live together.
Sure.
Trump tore that up, and people sort of forget that, don't they? I mean, it seems to me that he's what he hasn't really said during the election campaign is how much he hates the Iranians, and this, of course, many people seem to have missed this.
Well, I mean, that's the agenda, isn't it? I mean, that was the agenda for Biden as well. But they have to take on Iran, and the question is only how and when they're going to do it. And that's why, of course, we have to recognise that it's not just that the Zionist entity has to be collapsed. It's not just that we have to remove the Jewish state from the face of the earth and to have a one-state Palestine, is that we actually have to recognise that there will be no peace or of any significant nature in the world while we have the American empire in charge. Now, of course, we're moving economically and financially to a multipolar world, and US power is declining at a rate of knots, not as fast as we would like, of course, but really in the end, what's going to happen is that America's going to have to be defeated in conflict.
What about the what he's saying about God there? Because this is obviously a very powerful pull on people's heartstrings. A lot of people do believe in God, particularly in that part of the world, which is known as the Holy Land. There are scriptures that they quote. They will say things like in Ezekiel, the Lord says, with a pleasing savour I shall accept you when I take you out of the nations, and I shall gather you from the lands in which you were scattered. So is that a dangerous thing to read and believe?
When you say the Holy Land, are you referring to America?
No, I'm referring to Palestine.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course,
that's Zionism, though, isn't it? Just following that verse there from Ezekiel.
Well, I mean, yes, of course, Zionism originates in part from Christian Zionism, and they took on the ideas there, and but then, of course, there was, the idea of Israel in the first place was something which the Americans, the British, and then the Americans decided they would set up. But the problem is that the Zionists have slipped their leash, and they can't be stopped, and they won't be stopped, and so they have to be stopped. But actually, as was just being said a minute ago, if it comes to the kind of conflict which it looks like we're standing on the edge of with Iran, then America hasn't got hypersonic missiles, and neither has Israel. Neither has any Western power got hypersonic missiles, and because of what's happened here, right? In world historic terms, what's happened is that neoliberalism has undermined the power of imperialism. Because, Putin was faced when he came into power with a kind of mad ultra-neoliberalism. And he reversed it all and brought back in planning. It used to be called socialist planning. The Chinese continue to do planning, and they continue to control the economy, and therefore they have a weapons industry which is capable of producing enough weapons of a much higher quality than the ones which are held in the West to order. The Americans and the British haven't got the weapons. They can't develop the weapons in time because they haven't got a system of command and control, because they've got a neoliberal system. And so that what we're facing is that, because of that is the decline of the US empire, and the fact that the Americans can't even take on and defeat plucky Yemen in the Gulf, because Ansarallah in Yemen have weapons which can sink US aircraft carriers. Right? So that there's a real vulnerability of US empire now.
Isn't that a difficult thing to do, sink an aircraft carrier? They're quite big, aren't they?
They are quite big, but let's remember, they sent one out there, didn't they, a few months ago? And then they said, oh yes, it's come to the end of its rotation, it's going to head back.
Oh, yeah.
But the reason it was heading back was because it was so badly damaged that it couldn't function anymore. But they didn't want any footage of that, and it was so badly damaged by Ansarallah. We know that the Americans already knew this was going to happen, because when they threatened Yemen in the first place, they put together this coalition. Then the Spanish, the French, and the Challenge left it, and then they let it be known through the pages of the New York Times that actually they thought perhaps it wasn't a very good idea to destroy Yemen because they had some missiles which might be able to hit American boats. They said it publicly that they were scared.
Well, let's stick with Donald Trump's anti-war claims for a bit. What about this claim that in his 4 years he defeated ISIS?
Well, it was Iran which defeated ISIS, and of course Trump then killed the architect of the defeat of ISIS, Haj Qasem Soleimani, when he was on a peace mission, as everybody knew, and of course let's remember that ISIS was effectively the creation of the US and the UK, with some help from the Zionists.
Have you got any evidence for that? I mean,
well, it's been admitted by the Israelis that they were funding them, they were arming them, and effectively
the British created ISIS.
British and Americans were involved in the creation of ISIS, in Iraq. Yeah, that's right. And then, of course, the whole of the operation in Syria was not intended to defeat ISIS. It was intended to defeat the government of Assad, and it failed because, of course, the Russians came in and the Iranians came in, and indeed, of course, Hezbollah came in on the side of the government of Assad.
So he wants to take on and possibly obliterate, this is one of his favourite words, the country that actually really defeated ISIS.
That's right, yes.
Okay, so what about Ukraine? This is another one. He says he's going to shut this war down within 24 hours. That's a big claim.
Well, he might do that. I mean, the Zionists want that to happen because they don't see what the point of giving weapons to Ukraine is. Apart from the fact that they've already lost, the weapons could be much better employed, according to the Zionists, in Tel Aviv. On the Palestinians, on Hezbollah, on Iran, than they are with Comrade Zelensky.
Yeah, these are very different wars. Are they? I mean, for example, you've seen massive. They just announced today, I think it was, that something like two-thirds of those killed were women and children in Gaza. Not the same case in Ukraine, where it's almost exclusively been the military that have been being killed there. But are there connections between those two wars?
Well, I mean, these are both wars which are funded by the West. I mean, the Ukraine conflict was created by the West deliberately, first through the Maidan coup, and then everything that happened afterwards. And of course, what's happening in Gaza is being funded by the West. If it wasn't funded by the West, it couldn't continue. The IDF is already being beaten by Hezbollah on the northern border, but if they didn't have American weapons, then they would be beaten sharpish. They would be forced into a situation where they would have to, negotiate and come to some kind of agreement. So they're similar in that sense. But I think that the difference is that the Zionists have their own imperial agenda. Ukraine doesn't have its own imperial agenda. It doesn't have the capability or the ideology to do that. And the Zionists always have had that imperial agenda. They want a greater Israel. They want to take all of Lebanon, most of Syria, most of Jordan, part of Egypt, most of Iraq.
So Ukraine is a bit of a sideshow.
Well, it is, and it's been a method to try and discipline Putin, and it's.
Because, of course, he's down in the Middle East too, isn't he?
He is, that's right. I mean, the Russians of course, are in Syria. And in fact, the Russians have lookout posts, manned by Russian soldiers on the border of the Golan Heights, which is, of course, illegally occupied by Israel. Yeah. And so
where Rupert Murdoch's got his little shareholdings.
That's right. And the Russians fly missions up and down the Syrian coast as a way of trying to dissuade the Israelis from doing bombings in Damascus, and so they're in there, but they're not directly involved. Now, just the other week, there was a first time that the Israelis had attacked a Russian base in Syria. Now, that if I was Putin, I would be cross about that. I wouldn't.
So Martin, do you agree with David there that actually this is a stoppable one potentially?
Yes,
so he might actually do this for 24 hours.
Well, I think the problem is that the Russians have got a bit of a dilemma now, because Trump is going to make some kind of an offer to resolve it, but it won't be anything like what the Russians are prepared to accept. They were prepared to negotiate at the beginning. I mean, as they've said all along, if you don't negotiate with us now, we're going to drive a harder bargain the longer you carry on fighting. Because don't forget, their young people are dying. They're not dying in the same numbers as the Ukrainians, but they've got to justify to the mums what they died for. And they can't justify it if they settle for anything less than what they went to war for. So they're going to, I suspect that what will happen is the Russians are preparing for some kind of offer from Trump. I mean, Putin yesterday said he was prepared to talk to Trump. You can imagine all the Keir Starmer and all the sort of liberal left in the West going absolutely bonkers, because when Putin's evil and we just can't talk to him and all the rest of it. Trump will talk to him, but the problem from the Russian point of view is he's not going to make an offer that makes sense from their point of view, because they're going to want, they're going to want more than he's going to offer. And of course, at that point, Trump will say, "Well, I tried to talk to him, he didn't listen." And then the hardliners on his own side will say, "Right, well, we've got to fight this to the finish."
Well, look, someone who's well worth following, I think, on much to do with Ukraine, Russia, and generally the Russian military is a chap called Mark Sloboda. He used to work as a officer in the US military as part of their ballistic missile strategy. I'm not sure exactly what he did. I did ask him once and he smiled. But anyway, he had this to say about what he thinks is going to happen in Ukraine and whether Trump can really stop this within 24 hours.
That's not going to happen. First of all, neither the leadership of the West-backed Kiev regime in Ukraine want a deal, want an end to the conflict on terms as they exist right now, and neither does Russia. And it is extremely unlikely that any deal, Trump loves his deals that he presents, will be acceptable to either Kiev or Moscow. Moscow understands, and the West is finally coming to understand, or no longer being able to deny, that Russia is winning on the battlefield. So we've heard some of these plans of Trump surrogates of present and past, like Mike Pompeo. They're completely unacceptable to the Russian government, calling for a ceasefire, an effective freeze of the conflict with the possibility that Kiev can rearm and then take that ground back in a few years. That's completely unacceptable to Russia. I mean, it's just an absolute no-go from the start. And Trump will once again find himself constrained, just like he did in his first administration, by the limits of his office. The U.S. president actually has very little control over foreign and military policy, right? Whether you want to call it, Ben Rhodes called it the blob, the foreign policy elite, the deep state, the permanent bureaucracy, they will present him with a very limited range of options. To me, the most important thing is going to be when he presents his deal. Let's forget what Zelensky and the Kiev regime says at the time, but what happens when Putin says no? How is Trump going to take that? Because then the obvious, he has already threatened to flood Ukraine with so many weapons, his usual exaggeration, to force Russia to accept his deal. Except that the U.S., as he's later admitted, doesn't have those weapons, right? They don't have the munitions required to sustain this regime in this conflict. The military-industrial complex isn't geared up to produce artillery shells and air defense interceptor missiles. And the Pentagon stocks are completely empty at this point.
So that's Mark Sleboda. He's now teaching at Moscow State University International Relations, former quite a senior chap with the US. I'm not sure if it was Strategic Air Command. I think it was after the days of that. But anyway, what do you make of that analysis? That basically Putin, this question is, what happens to Trump when Putin says no?
Well, I mean, obviously the Russians would want at least 5 or 6 of the oblasts of Ukraine. They've currently got almost 4, including almost all of Luhansk and Donetsk, but not quite. And they would want to get to Odessa. And that, I would imagine that would be the kind of settlement that they would go for. I mean, personally, I think that's crazy, but they should be asking for way more. But that probably is what they would go for. But Trump's never going to offer them that. I mean, that's never going to be offered. So, and then of course there is no possibility of escalating. They've already tried to escalate as far as they can. The Zionists are not going to be pleased with the proper weapons being sent to Ukraine instead of being sent to them, because there's not enough to go around. There's not enough even to defend the Zionists. I mean, this famous THAAD air defense system, which has just been sent into Israel after the last Iranian missiles were sent over. I understand that they take 8 missiles in each launcher, that there are 1,000 of those missiles in the world. And they can't produce any more before a year's out. So that's going to last about 5 minutes when the Iranians attack.
Yeah, they're expensive, these things.
Very expensive, yes.
So before we hear from Martin, let's hear a final clip from Mark Sleboda, speaking, by the way, on RT, which is very easy to have a look at on Rumble, folks. That's where I have a look at it, even though it's been banned here on Wednesday. Very interesting coverage on RT of the US elections. In fact, probably more sensible, and it's funny, isn't it, that they blocked it for us. Anyway, he was also asked about Kursk, this incursion that's been going on for several months into Russia itself by the Ukrainians.
The Kiev regime's troops in Kursk have been locked in a fire bag, and they have suffered enormous casualties that the Kiev regime can't afford in both manpower, some of its best remaining units, and in increasingly scarce Western gear, including such systems as HIMARS, as Leopard and Challenger and Abrams tanks and the like. They've been bleeding so much for absolutely zero strategic gain or value from this. This was a short-lived tactical and InfoWar success and a huge strategic catastrophe that has led to the acceleration of the collapse of the Kiev regime forces in South Donbass region and the Pokrovsk area. So I think Zelensky is actually taking advantage of this situation of Trump's election to do what he should have done a long time ago and withdraw from a bad situation instead of throwing good after bad. I think this isn't a signal. I don't read it as a signal of him moving towards peace discussions or negotiations. Rather, he's taking advantage of a change in political circumstance to do what militarily should have been done a long time ago.
The intervention in Kursk, as he's saying there, was a reckless throw of the dice by Zelensky. So they could put in their main reserves were put into that, but of course they're not necessarily.
Hang on, you could also see Kursk as a bit of an exercise, really, for the NATO countries. A lot of their tech was being trialled there. What can we get away with here?
Well, I mean, the Russians believe that it was actually British intelligence who were behind the whole planning of that particular operation, and it was subcontracted to the British to coordinate that. So, I mean, Britain, in fact, is very much in the bad books in Moscow. You saw what happened with Keir Starmer going to the NATO conference in Washington, and he was trying to get the Americans to agree to use British Storm Shadow missiles to fire into Russia. And it was the Pentagon, through Lloyd Austin, who said, we're not doing that. So he had to come back empty-handed. And, of course, it wasn't just Keir Starmer. You had Boris Johnson, the peacemaker of April 2022, and various other great and good in Britain saying, well, even if the Americans aren't going to fire missiles into Russia, maybe Britain should take a stand and go out in front and fire missiles at the Russians. But the Americans weren't having that either. The Pentagon wasn't having that either, because obviously, if Britain did fire its missiles into Russia and the American missiles weren't used, that would still be, because of NATO and all the rest of it, that would still be, as far as they're concerned, that would still be the Americans getting involved. So the Pentagon, fascinatingly enough, are the people blocking this at the moment, because they will know what will happen. The Russians have made it clear, we will fire back at Britain. Yeah? So if you're in the SAS base in Credon Hill in Herefordshire, when you're having your dinner,
put your tin hats on.
Get your tin hats on, because if you're going to kill our people, I'm presuming they'll go for military targets inside Russia, so they'll kill a few Russian boys. Well, we're going to kill some British boys inside your territory.
David, do you think that's feasible?
It's perfectly feasible. I mean, the fascination is that in terms of the West Asia and the Axis of Resistance, that the costs haven't moved outside the theatre. I mean, Nasrallah said before he died that if there was any evidence that the Cypriots were involved in helping the Zionists, that Hezbollah would directly target Cyprus. Now, of course, it's not the Cypriot government that was involved. Of course, it's totally against their will. It's the British government who have those two bases, which they should be ejected from forthwith, in my view, in Cyprus. And what could happen, it's easily within the range of Hezbollah weapons, never mind the weapons of the Islamic Republic, to take out those bases altogether. That could be done at the flick of a switch. And the question is only, why on earth have the Axis of Resistance not gone there yet? And they can go there, and the Russians could go there too. The Russians could be taking out Hereford, and indeed Menwith Hill, and GCHQ, and MI6 and MI5 with precision strikes. Could be done at the flick of a switch.
The Russian missiles are really, really powerful. They can fire them from Siberia, and they can hit central United States within half an hour. Yeah. And the West hasn't got anything like that. And of course, the real danger here is any of these missiles could be nuclear armed. And therefore, if that missile is coming towards you, whether you're Russian or on the Western side, you've got to presume that it might have a nuclear warhead.
Okay, hang on, ladies and gentlemen, because we're coming up to Remembrance Sunday this weekend, where we are supposed to, I slightly flippantly in the introduction said it's Forgetfulness Sunday, because all of these great and good, led by the King, will be stood next to the Cenotaph in Whitehall, so-called remembering those dead of 2 world wars and other conflicts, because all these people from Afghanistan now queue up there, but a whole load of veterans from the Royal British Legion. Do you think it is a forgetfulness or remembrance, David?
Remembrance Sunday. Well, it's a remembrance of those conflicts which we want to remember. It's not just people complain on the left. They say, "Oh, it's only the conflicts the British were involved in. We don't remember the victims in Kenya or Malaysia or in fact Cyprus or in Dhofar. All the victims of British imperialism or in Ireland."
Because we don't seem to remember it at all, do we? What we're doing is we're starting another world war. That's right. What we're doing.
So we remember selectively some of those conflicts, but we don't even. It's not even the question of remembering our own casualties, because of course we don't remember. Let's remember we don't remember the 840 British servicemen killed by the Zionists in the setting up of Israel, right? So that there's a selective memory even in the question of our own side. And of course, as you say, there's no remembrance of the horror of the Second World War and what could happen if we tip over the edge into a Third World War, which someone like Keir Starmer appears to be, just wanting to do as a kind of side game. I mean, it's just incredible.
There doesn't seem to also be any remembrance of who won the Second World War.
That's right. Who won the Second World War? It was the Red Army. That's right. The Red Army liberated the whole of Europe, practically.
So Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, was in Sochi this week. He had this to say, amongst lots of other things. I'll put a link up to the full version of these various things, the Trump speeches, etc., and this speech by Putin, which is about an hour or so long, from early this week, up on our show page later at thisweek.org.uk.
We see in the Western liberalism that has degenerated into, I believe, in extreme intolerance and aggression towards any alternative, towards any sovereign and independent thought. And today, it justifies neo-Nazism, terrorism, racism, and even mass genocide of civilian population. In the end, that's international conflicts and clashes that might bring about mutual destruction, because the weapons capable of doing that already exist. And it's constantly being improved. It acquires new forms as the technologies develop. And the club of the countries that possess such weapons is becoming wider, and no one can guarantee that in case of avalanche-like increase in threats and final deterioration of legal and moral norms, it would not be used. I have already said that we've come to a dangerous line, and calls of the West to deliver strategic defeat to Russia, a country with the largest arsenal of nuclear weapons, shows extreme adventurism of the Western politicians. At least some of them. Such blind faith in their own impunity and exceptionalism might turn to a global tragedy. At the same time, the previous hegemons used to ruling the world back from colonial times learn, and more often to their surprise, that no one is listening to them. The attempts to maintain the power slipping away through force only leads to overall instability and great tensions, to casualties and destruction, but the result that they're trying to achieve to maintain their absolute power, such attempts do not ensure success, because the course of history cannot be stopped. Instead of becoming aware of futility of their strive, the objective nature of changes, some of the Western elites seems prepared to do everything not to allow for emergence of new international system in line with the interests of the world majority. The policy of the U.S. and their allies in the past years is more and more prominent through the principle, if I can't have it, no one will. If you're not with us, you're against us. Well, this formula is very dangerous. Because here and in many countries of the world, there is such a saying that you reap what you sow. The chaos and systemic crisis is already in full swing in those countries that are trying to conduct such a policy. The claims to being exceptional, to being liberal and globalist messiahs, to ideological and military and political monopoly, are depleting those countries more and more that are trying to conduct this policy and pushing the world towards deterioration. It comes in direct contradiction with the true interests of the nations of the US and European countries. I'm sure that sooner or later the West will understand that, because the foundation of its former great achievements was always the pragmatic and sober approach based on very harsh and at times cynical but rational evaluation of what's happening in their own capacities. And here I'd like to highlight once again, unlike our opponents, Russia does not perceive the Western civilization as an enemy. It does not raise the question, us or them. Who's not with us, he's against us. We never say that. We don't want to pontificate to anyone. We don't want to impose our worldview on anyone. Our position is an open one, and it's the following. The West has accumulated indeed tremendous human, intellectual, cultural, and material resources, thanks to which it can successfully develop, remaining one of the crucial elements of the world system. But it is precisely one of, together with other actively developing countries and states and groups of countries, the notion of hegemony in the new international sphere is off the table. And when Washington and other Western capitals become aware of that and recognize this cold hard fact, then the process of building of the global system in line with the challenges of the future will finally enter the phase of true constructive building. I hope to God that it will happen as soon as possible. It is in common interest.
I quite like the way he said, I hope to God. He sounds a little bit like Trump, Martin, but he at least seems to also have a vision of peace. Whether or not it's going to happen or not is another question.
Well, that's right. I mean, that's sober, rational analysis, isn't it? It's not like fantasy land, which we heard from Trump earlier. Ultimately, there's either going to be a nuclear war in which we're all going to die, or the West is going to lose a non-nuclear war. That's all there is to it, Ram. We've reached that point.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite right. I mean, but I think that what we've seen emerging as a result of what's happened in Ukraine and the emergence of multipolarity, and what we've come to learn about the state of military preparedness of the West, is that actually it's quite possible for the West to lose. And that if we don't have a nuclear war, where, as you've just said, we all die, then it's very possible that militarily the West will lose, and we will enter a new world where the West is not a dominant element in the world.
So, I mean, aren't our leaders actually dragging us to that defeat? I mean, they've been defeated in almost every war that NATO countries have been involved in since World War II. It's this is just the biggest one so far that they're leading us into now. I
think that's right, but they don't appear ever to be able to understand what the situation is. I mean, the stuff that they come out with about Russia, I mean, I heard the head of, I think it was MI5, it might have been MI6 the other day, talk about the Russian threat and the terrible things that Russians have done, and a child knows that everything he said was wrong. And this is a person who's at the top of the most powerful intelligence agency in this country, and he's unable to actually tell you anything about the world, which is not just ridiculous propaganda. I mean, incredible.
Well, the counter move to the West, which is this sort of rather spectacularly dying empire, being forced to die by its utterly incompetent and maniacal leaders, is this thing called the BRICS, which is up and coming. They had a meeting last week, and one of our favourite economists, Michael Hudson, he did a little podcast earlier this week where he talked about what the BRICS really, how that fits in, this big economic alliance which is growing and growing with a big list all the time, to counter the West.
Well, the question is whether, if they solve these internal problems, whether they're going to still try to have the old predatory economics in the BRICS countries. In the 19th century, Britain had all sorts of ideas about how to have a thriving, popular industrial economy. They were going to tax the landlords. They were going to keep finance and real estate all isolated. But when the British wealthy financiers and investors went to third world countries, to the Ottoman Empire or to Latin America for railroads, utilities, the Panama Canal, and the Suez Canal, they were all of a sudden, that's where they supported the rent-seeking and the grabbing. So this internal contradiction that you rightly point to the United States is going to affect the BRICS as well. And all I can think of is that the BRICS countries will watch this strain within the United States and England. Today's Financial Times had a large, so their biggest report was on the commercial real estate crisis, that so many of the biggest buildings in the city, the financial city of London, had debt in excess of the value of the building. So here you can, what are you going to do to buy the biggest skyscraper in London if it has $467 million in debt, and they're trying to get 500 million for it, but nobody's going to bid for that. Same thing in America. Commercial real estate is broken. Well, the banks hold the mortgages on these, and if the defaults are soaring for commercial real estate in London, England, and America, just as they are in China. So we're having a worldwide problem, and the question is, are you going to bail out the banks? And if you don't bail out the banks, what's going to happen to their largest depositors, the uninsured depositors, the rich people? Are you going to save them? This is the problem that's going to occur. Already is occurring in China, and it's going to occur in other BRIC countries. So when you look at the BRICS meetings, what you talked about at the beginning quite correctly is we would like to hope that future historians will look back on these meetings in Kazan as the first step to creating an alternative civilization, because we're really talking about a civilization break from the West. And by civilization, I mean the tax system, the debt relations, the monetary relations, the military defense systems, the political systems, all of these in order to avoid the contradictions that you and I have been discussing for decades now. They're going to have to create an alternative. And this is a gigantic job. Obviously, it couldn't be solved at one meeting, or I don't think even by next year meeting they can't. But what is needed is a consciousness that they are trying to create a new basis for a non-Western, non-U.S. dominated, non-unipolar civilization, and the recognition that this cannot be achieved with a friendly relations with the West, that the West will not accept it, and the West will try to have a fifth column of non-government organizations, such have been recently banned in the state of Georgia, the country of Georgia. They realize that the U.S. has a whole fifth column of a managerial class that would like to take over along the same lines that have enriched it so well, as you've described, in America and Europe. Well, obviously, the strains of supporting the military budget and the Cold War and the U.S. sanctions against Russia are going to be felt, first of all, in Europe. So I think you're quite right. Already you have the strains pulling the German economy, the French economy, the Austrian economy all apart. And what are the vested interests going to do there? Well, they're going to do what they did in Germany. They will ban these parties, like they're trying to ban the Alternative for Deutschland. They'll ban the left-wing parties. They'll ban the reformist parties, saying these are agents of Putin, agents of China, agents of the BRICS. It's the West that will treat any attempt to be to reform economies as being an attack on the West itself, and by if the West permits the BRICS to create a solution to these tensions, if they permit the BRICS to have a rational tax system, a progressive tax system, as you and I want to see, then America will say, we're not really fighting China or Russia, we're fighting a different economic system. And the geopolitical war we're seeing isn't among countries, it's between one system or another. You can call it one civilization or another, or one kind of economy or another. But this is a civilizational up the ante that there has to be. I didn't see any of that in the BRICS meeting because that would be that would frighten a lot of countries. And I think that Russia, China, and the other leaders of the BRICS right now are trying to avoid frightening these countries. But implicitly, these economic strains or contradictions that you point out have to be leading in this direction. These what you describe as the domestic strains in France, in Europe, in America, as we had under Roosevelt, all of these will be reflected on the geopolitical level. And the vested interests have a twofold fight. Not only fighting against the reformers who don't want to give all the money to the bondholders and the banks, the rentier class, but they're fighting against the ability of BRICS countries to say it doesn't have to be this way. We can do our own way different. And if you want to follow our model and reform your economies and prevent the impoverishment and the economic polarization that your financial class and your bondholding class and banking class and real estate class are causing, then either join the BRICS or emulate us. This is what is the nightmare to the United States. Is not yet a nightmare to the BRICS countries and their vested interests, but you're quite right. It's a nightmare mostly within the West because that is where they're much more aware of the class war here than they seem to be aware of in other countries that don't have a background in studying class war in the way that we have. But everything that they're talking about, restructuring international institutions, is exactly setting the stage for this dual conflict within the West, within the BRICS, and between the West and the BRICS.
So there's Michael Hudson there. I just love the way he takes you through every little bit you need to explain exactly what he's saying. So we can just put the military conflicts aside for 1 minute, David. What you've got here is the West has successfully managed to bring countries like China, South Africa, etc., together in the BRICS. I mean, what Michael's saying is that actually they may be suffering from some of exactly the same problems to do with financial parasitism, rentier classes that the West has. And so that although it looks like it's a unified group, actually there's battles going on within the BRICS too.
Well, there are battles going on within the BRICS, and the whole question of who's allowed to join the BRICS, of course, is part of that battle. I mean, we saw the dispute, didn't we, between Brazil and Venezuela, with Lula suggesting that Venezuela wouldn't be allowed to join the BRICS. But we're also facing a kind of shaking out of the whole of the post-war settlement in Europe. So when he's talking there about the sanctions on Russia, and of course what happened with the sanctions on Russia was that they immediately boomeranged and hurt the West much more than they hurt Russia. And also, of course, they hurt the European countries much more than they hurt America. And that, of course, was also what happened with the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline. And you would think, given this was the guarantor of the future of energy security for Germany, you know, the most powerful nation in Europe, that the German elite would have something to say when the Americans blew up their pipeline. But what did they do? They said nothing at all, not a thing. Nothing publicly was said. And that really struck me. I didn't, when I saw that happen, I couldn't understand what that was about. And then, of course, one remembers that, the origin of what was called West Germany after the end of the war was that it was created by the Americans, and that the people who they recruited to head the West German intelligence agency was a guy who had been one of Hitler's intelligence officers, and he was also a CIA agent. So all the way through this period, we've had a really strong influence of the US on German politics, which we haven't really, I think, understood. And that of course, is the case in this country too, where you earlier referred to the UK as being the Unsinkable Aircraft Carrier, which is Duncan Campbell's book, wasn't it, back in the day? Yeah, I mean, look, we are systematically in Europe subservient to the US. And we had this period where it looked like globalization was happening, and neoliberalization, which was meaning that there would be transnational capital and corporations wouldn't owe a debt of allegiance to a particular state. And all of that has collapsed in the last 5 or 6 years, hasn't it?
But I rather like Michael Hudson's discussion of what he's talking about, the commercial property crisis in the City of London and paralleled in China. I mean, an economic collapse on that sort of scale could lead to as many, if not more, deaths than the sort of war we're talking about in the Middle East, if it's limited to the Middle East. Or, I mean, certainly the effect on the public could be massive if the IMF and the BRICS don't get their act together.
Well, I mean, it's a very serious situation. Yeah, I mean, I'm not familiar with particularly with the details of the real estate crisis.
I'd like to. I'll put a link up to that FT article
it's
anyway.
It's a pretty extraordinary account that he gave there.
Martin, do you want to just say what your thoughts are about the BRICS versus the IMF, and what it seems as if both of them are going down the same tubes?
Well, I think there's an overlap between the economic crisis and the geopolitical crisis. In the run-up, when the First World War broke out, the stock markets all collapsed, and then the governments had to step in and organise the economy. And I think, and of course in World War II it was a bit different, because the stock market had collapsed in 1929 in the US, and there was in Germany and the US there was an attempt to try and create some kind of economic planning by Haldemar Schlacht, who was the German finance minister, and also by, Roosevelt's team in the US. But I think what we're going to see here, so for example, if there is a clash between Iran and Israel, which looks as if it's on the cards before Christmas, that could then lead to the closing of the Strait of Hormuz to oil exports, which will immediately blow up the derivatives time bomb, which has been developing in the financial markets.
These oil tankers are a bit more vulnerable than the aircraft carriers, and they also go up, don't they?
Yeah, but the point is that the traders who trade on a daily basis on what the future is going to be will panic at that point, and that will crash everything. And so the effect of this World War III, if it breaks out in the way I'm suggesting, will be immediate in terms of the effect on the economy because of the futures market.
Fascinating. Anyway, look, we had just last week, David, the admission that this young lad from Southport had been downloading terrorist manuals and things. The guy that went and killed these 3 children, allegedly, because obviously he's not been tried yet. What did you make of that? Everyone was rather surprised. It almost seems to have flipped back one way or another way. First of all, he was being accused of being a Muslim, which he wasn't, and now he's being accused of downloading the Al Qaeda training manual. Bizarre.
Well, it's not the Al Qaeda training manual, is it? Let's remember this was a manual which was translated from the Arabic, found in a flat in Manchester in, I don't know, 1996 or something. It was then taken to the US and bits were added to it. It was published by a US military-funded think tank. It's not the Al-Qaeda training manual. In fact, the original bits of it were written before the creation of Al-Qaeda. So this is a nonsense. It's absolutely nonsense. You can buy this document on Amazon all over the world. So let's knock that off. And the second thing, he was supposed to be, what was it, ricin. Now, let's remember that the last time we had ricin in the public debate, there this guy was trying to create ricin, and there was going to be there was a weapon of mass destruction. Well, ricin isn't a weapon of mass destruction, and he wasn't able to make ricin. He had some beans and he had some shit, and he wasn't able to do anything with it. And because he was mentally ill. There was nothing. It was a non-thing, which the British state
precursors
covered up for a whole year. They knew that there was no ricin, and they let the whole thing run.
So what do you make of this? Do you believe the police?
No, of course I don't believe the police. I mean, maybe he had the stuff, but it isn't anything. It's not an indication of anything at all.
I mean, it was the ramifications that I think for most people grabbed our attention, which were the riots across the country, fueled by the Tommy Robinson Network. Now, I know you've written something recently, haven't you, about how the Israel... Do you want to just explain a bit, briefly, why you think that this is that he is part of the Israel lobby?
Well, look, what happened, I mean, this is a long story. You have to look at the article.
It is, yeah. Well, I'll put a link up to it.
Grey Zone. But my argument essentially is that in 2007, 2008, 2009, that some US think tanks funded by the Israel lobby came across to Europe and decided that they didn't want the far right to have a position on Israel which was critical of Israel. And therefore they wanted to co-opt elements of the far right, and they offered them money so long as they abandoned Judeophobia and became fans of Israel and made sure that the only people they said they would hate was Muslims. Now, Nick Griffin of the BNP rejected that. The Front National in France rejected that for a time, but other organisations, which became what was called the counter-jihad movement across the whole of Europe, accepted it, and they became, they focused on Muslims and Islam. And Tommy was one of those. Set up the English Defence League. The meeting at which the English Defence League was founded at a flat in London by one of the financiers of the English Defence League, 5 people in the room. 2 of them were from this American organisation funded by the Zionists. Tommy Robinson is a Zionist asset. He was then, he is now.
This weekend, you're doing a little event, I believe, in town here, which is called Genocide in Gaza Part 3. Sorry for missing Part 1 and 2. But looking at the education system. Now, I know you, as a university lecturer, have been cancelled by your university, so that's obviously a part of what you're talking about. But what's the rest of this?
It's an online event, actually, so wherever you are in the world, you can join. But this is an event with Leila Atel-Haj from Prevent Watch, and we're looking at the education system in general. Yes, we'll look at the university, but in particular, the thing I'm interested in is the way in which there's 135 Jewish schools